Okay, looks like we're leveling off a few more people joining in. So we'll do housekeeping real quick. Thank you all for joining us for this webinar today. I'm Chad Davis. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Nebraska Public Media and also one of the co-founders of this group, Public Media Innovators. And on behalf of Amber Samdahl at PBS Wisconsin and David Hubbard at PBS North Carolina, I just want to say thanks for joining us. Like I said, I do a few housekeeping details to get started. First of all, thanks to everyone who came to the June webinar. We'll pop a link in of where you can watch that on YouTube if you're interested. Amber is always very prompt with the links, so you can check that out there. And then let's see, we'll little tease for our August webinar, which is going to feature a couple of authors from Stanford's D School or Design School. David booked them, and we're super excited because it's all going to be about creative hustle. And like today's speaker, they are folks we connected with at South by Southwest last year. So a little bit more on that in just a second. I want to do one final plug before we dive in. And one quick thank you. The thank you is to our friends at NIDA for supporting this group and just sort of helping us get the word out about these webinars. And then the plug is for friend of the group, Carrie Kozicki's panel in a week. It'll be July 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's a webinar that's being presented with our friends at the Content PLC. And it is called Lean Times, Bold Visions, Project Management in Public Media's Uncertain Era. Now, she had no idea at the time that we were going to be doing a webinar on uncertainty, so I filled her in on that. And she's in the chat, but just a heads up, you can pop over and register for that. Once we get done with the intros, we'll drop in a link so you can register there. So I would now like to thank Maggie Jackson for joining us and agreeing to speak. When David and I were in her session at South by Southwest, we were texting each other, even though we were sitting next to each other because we didn't want to be rude and talk, but we were texting each other about like, oh my God, how great this is. And like public media totally needs to hear this. And she was super generous with us when we walked up afterwards, just cold, and said like, hey, would you be willing to maybe talk for this group that we have that gets together every month? And so Maggie is someone who like often gets paid to speak, and she's doing this because she appreciates public media. So many thanks to her on that. Maggie splits her time between New England and New York. She is a journalist and columnist for many, many years. She worked for the AP. She worked for the Boston Globe, both as columnist. She has reported and written from Japan, Tokyo, and also from London, obviously from Boston and New England as well. And she has, over the years, developed a certain interest in technology and its effects on people. And that led her to write this book, Uncertain, which has been nominated for a National Book Award. It was on many Best Books of 2024 list. And like I said, we saw her speak in Austin and we were just completely blown away. So Maggie, thank you for giving your time to us today, and we'll let you take it away.
Oh, thank you very much, Chad and Amber and David. And it's great to be with you all today. I am indeed a huge supporter, fan, everything of public media, not just coming from the mix, but also just in general. So again, really an honor to be with you. I'm going to start off by sharing my my PowerPoint to begin, to get that going. And someone can tell me if
Yep,
it's
looks
work.
good, Maggie.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're here. And then, yeah, so I'll just start in and definitely save time for questions. So I like to, especially when I'm in the room, but even virtually, actually, this is the first time I'll try this virtually, but when I'm talking to people in the same room, I like to get a kind of an analog show of hands of one quick snap poll related to uncertainty. So we're going to try it now. Pretty easy. Put in the chat the one word that comes to mind when I say uncertainty. And I'm going to be flipping back and forth to all sorts of different screens. So maybe Chad, you could say you could read it out a little bit. The first
Sure.
three or four, what are those words? You could help me out here.
I wrote anxiety, but people also wrote anxiety, scary, uh, fun, or just kind of fun, funding, fear, funding, obviously very potent
Yeah.
topic for us. Queasy, opportunity, that's an interesting one from Anne.
Okay.
Control.
One
I see
more. Okay.
a lot of anxieties over and over again. Anxieties.
Oh, wow. Yes, exactly. Well, I'll have to say that I've been doing this for, more than a year, and generally the first word that comes up is anxiety. Wherever I go, whoever I'm talking to, whatever their profession in this world, it makes sense. And then also, just again, unscientifically, anecdotally, but about three-quarters of the words that I get are negative, and then you see a positive word pop up, like opportunity or even just chance or exploration. So that's really interesting. And we'll unpack, I think, both of those elements today. Um, the first thing I'd like to say, actually, is that it is natural that we humans dislike uncertainty because, simplistically speaking, we survive by needing and getting answers. We need resolution wherever we are in the world. If you're in the forest and you are starving, you need to know if that fruit is poisonous or delicious. From there it goes on. You need to know if your boss is going to be good for your career or bad for your career. But the question I am asking and have been asking myself as I dug into the research on uncertainty is, what if we in our contemporary society have been pushing this innate natural dislike of uncertainty a bit too far? In other words, studies show, but I don't think you even need the studies to know that in our culture, uncertainty is seen as highly negative and weakness and inertia. There's also evidence that there is a rising quote unquote intolerance of uncertainty. I'll try to unpack that a little bit. I just read, one little political science study, and the conclusion, which is all about epistemic or being open-minded toward other people's opinions. And one of the political scientists wrote, "There's no more rare words in the American language today than I don't know," which, again, speaks to this certainty centricity. It's also important to note that this didn't come in yesterday. The roots of what I think of as an allergy to uncertainty today are long and deep. We can point to hundreds of years of emphasis in the West on efficiency and speed, and we can also draw a link to the technologies that offer us crisp, neat answers, bullet points, etc. That changes what it means to know. But the exciting thing is, and what I'm here today to talk about, is that there's a new science, a new explosion of research on uncertainty in all its guises that offer us a reframe, that basically offer us the chance to update our quite insufficient and outdated and mistaken understanding of this concept. So today I'd like to talk about three pillars of uncertainty that can help us in 2025. It is a kind of wakefulness. I'll explain. Uncertainty is the linchpin to a human adaptability, and it's also the rocket fuel of excellence in collaboration. And there is an urgency to this work of the reframe because we do live, it's not just our perception, we do live in a world of rising unpredictability. There are many, many different barometers. It's not just the rates of use of the word uncertainty. Maybe you've heard of that uncertainty index that economists like to refer to out of Stanford. It's not just that, actually. Insecurity in job hours among many different populations are rising. Geopolitics, climate, extreme weather plan. We know it. We see it all. And of course, your field is in the ground zero, one might call it, of unpredictability today. How can public media, as important as it is, survive years of funding pressure and today's roller coaster political policies? And what will younger listeners' news feeds look like in 5 years or 6 months? So I'm not going to argue today that uncertainty is any kind of panacea, but it is, science is showing us, an overlooked productive force. It's not something to dread and fear, but actually to wield. It's a cognitive tool that we can wield skillfully. And so before I dig in further, I also want to just define uncertainty very briefly, because I've bandied about that word and we see it in the headlines and we talk about it and we don't really explicitly define what we mean. There are basically two major buckets. I mean, you can find a lot of different vocabulary, taxonomies, etc., related to language and research about uncertainty in different domains like economics, etc. But there are two big buckets, basically, and they'll ring true to our lived experience, basically. There's the one kind of uncertainty is aleatory, it's called, and that is just basically the uncertainty out there. I like to call it unpredictability, volatility, because that distinguishes it from the second kind. And also just consider for a minute more, aleatory uncertainty is basically what we humans can't fully know. So, for example, a storm might be headed your way, and despite the probabilistic modeling, AI-generated predictions that can give you a toehold on likelihood, you don't know if the storm is going to do X amount of damage or even where it'll land. That's aleatory, the uncertainty out there. And then second is epistemic uncertainty. That's our psychological unsureness or uncertainty. It's basically the human response to the unknown. So whenever we as organisms meet up with anything new, unexpected, or ambiguous, we get the chance to recognize that we've reached the limits of our knowledge. We're operating at the edge. That's uncertainty. It's not ignorance. It's actually the idea that we're caught short, we feel uneasy, and yet, well, consider the storm example. Should I evacuate? Should I turn off the TV? Should I go to bed? Should I call my friend? Uncertainty is a space of possibilities. It opens up the space between question and answer. And it is, again, underscore, we dislike it. It's highly, it makes us uncomfortable. So let's stay with that point. Again, the uncomfort of uncertainty, and talk a little bit about our brains on uncertainty. So this is a pyramidal neuron. It's actually the largest neuron in the brain. It makes up 2/3 of our cerebral cortex, the top layer of the brain. It's kind of a big gun machinery in the cognitive world. And it's very, very highly important, plays an important role, these pyramidal neurons, in our human ability to assess and acknowledge and sense uncertainty. So as I mentioned, whenever we meet up with something new, we feel uneasy, the traffic jam, the storm, which job to take or whether or not you're going to get fired, or all these sorts of existential on down questions. And you are experiencing basically a stress response. That makes sense. When we are uncertain, neurotransmitters and hormones cascade through our body and brain, instigating symptoms like the racing heart or the sweaty palms, etc. But interestingly, just in the last decade and a half, scientists have begun to unpack what's happening in the brain on uncertainty and have been discovering that there are some highly positive responses when we're uncertain. So for instance, the pyramidal neurons act like almost little modems in the brain. They're broadcasting the state of uncertainty, the idea that you've met up with something new or ambiguous, and your brain becomes more receptive on the whole to new information. Another thing that occurs when you're unsure is your working memory goes up. You're a little bit on your toes, and also your focus sharpens. In fact, studies out of the University of Washington show that emergency room doctors who are in sticky clinical situations and who feel uncertain also report that heightened attention, which of course helps them perform. So uncertainty, it turns out, is good stress. And I love this quote by Joseph Cable, the neuroscientist. Uncertainty is the brain telling itself there's something to be learned here. Scientists call this uncertainty a form of arousal. It's actually putting you on your toes. It's signaling that routine won't do, that you're not, outside of, complacency should be at an end. It's time to update your understanding of the world. And one important corollary here, which is, and especially vis-a-vis the anxiety and fear that pops up when we, think about uncertainty, uncertainty is not fear. The uncertainty response is arousal, as I mentioned. It's actually a kind of performance mode, whereas fear, which all inhabits a different stress system, but a related stress system in your body and brain, fear is related to a cognitive shutting down and instigating survival mode, not performance mode. So you might get a beating heart, but at the same time, your blood is funneling away from your extremities toward the core to protect yourself, and allowing you only to do certain things like flee or fight, etc. So we all understand, I think, intuitively, that when we're really afraid, we're not able to make complex decisions. And so one question I get asked, and that perhaps comes to mind, is how do we avert the fear, especially in a highly precarious life today, and then lean into uncertainty? How do you want to cultivate that performance mode? And there are different strategies, but one I'll highlight is to, in a challenging situation, we don't want to fixate on outcome, which is kind of, in a metaphorical way, the order of the day, fixating on outcome. But if you are, say, giving a challenging presentation to a client, and you really need to be on your toes and in performance mode, the worst thing you can do, study after study shows, is to focus on, am I doing well? Am I going to get that bonus or this or the deal? Am I going to seal the deal? I'm not doing well. The boss is frowning at me. If you can see that you are, by fixating on outcome, swiveling your cognitive resources away from that epic chance that uncertainty offers you to be in arousal, to be in tune with the environment, and you're focusing on, you're putting the cart before the horse, you're focusing on not the process that gains you a good outcome, but the outcome itself. So that's really important. And it's really interesting because in sports, but also different performance studies in the arts and things like that, one thing that we can do to, stave off outcome fixation, or to basically swivel our attention back to that uncertain moment and be in the moment, is to use something called cue words. Very simple. It's not a mantra, which is sort of a way of focusing in a meditative way. A cue word is something that athletes use. They might say to themselves, in the game, Maggie, or focus now, and just push their attention back into the moment, in order to, again, open up to that curiosity that is there to tap. So I've talked a little bit about the arousal of uncertainty, how uncertainty is good stress. And I think that it's also really important to understand that we can think of that arousal, that good stress of uncertainty, as a kind of the stance that a baseball player will take when they get in the batting box, or get out on the home plate, and they're ready, and they're taking the right stance. and that's being open to the uncertainty. But that doesn't mean the game is ended. They have to confront and play that ball. And so basically, that's a great analogy for uncertainty because it's not enough to just get on your toes, but also we can utilize uncertainty skillfully. It's actually, uncertainty is an ally and accompaniment to good decision making. So as I began to discover this incredible news about uncertainty, basically, I asked myself, well, does that mean uncertainty plays a role in the most high stakes life or death moments? In other words, would you want your surgeon to be unsure in the middle of a crisis in the operating room? And so I dug into that question and embedded myself in operating rooms in Toronto, Canada. Here we see a picture of Carol Ann Moulton, who's a surgeon there and who studies, she's a surgeon scientist. She studies surgical judgment related to questions of uncertainty and crisis thinking. And she also is a highly renowned surgeon in her own right. She helped me gain access to multiple operations. I stood literally on a step stool a few feet from the patient inside the operating room with my little tape recorder. It was quite an amazing experience. And I was wondering, is it foolish or brilliant for a surgeon to be uncertain in the middle of a crisis? And so the question becomes, what is an expert? Well, one morning, she and I were watching a liver operation. One of Canada's top surgeons was basically removing the cancerous half of a liver of a school teacher. And she was my guide to what was happening in the moment. The surgeon was, exactly as we would expect. He was, fluent and quick and watching the clock and barking orders. He knew just what to do, except until the moment the operation came to a grinding halt. The surgeon thought that he and his team had cut a little organ called the bile duct, which, if severed, means the patient usually doesn't survive. And I began to think, what is an expert? Are the sages of our time, of our crisis-laden times? Is there more to the story than the expert who strides into the room and is quick and sure, which is the person we put on the pedestal in leadership and many professions? So let's walk back just a minute, and I have a question for you. How do we become an expert? Let's take a minute and I'll just take a few in the chat. What does it entail? I'll just throw out learning. We have to go to school. And maybe Chad, you can help me again
I,
with just
Isaac
any,
says practice making mistakes from Marcia.
yeah,
I was going to say experience. I won't type it, but
yes,
that's me. Yeah.
yes, I love that
Oh,
already. You
Deborah
guys,
says experience. Yep.
you nail it so quickly. Wow, great. So learning, experience, practice, and I love making mistakes because that's a great segue into what I'm going to be talking about. Basically, we become experts by all of these facets, and we eventually gain or accrue, build mental models and heuristic shortcut thinking based on our knowledge, and then we become people who can know at a glance just what to do. The doctor hears the patient say, chest pains, I'm experiencing chest pains, and then he or she thinks heart attack. That's heuristic thinking. Very fluent, very quick, and very effective, a hugely impressive part of expertise, except that it works only in predictable situations where our old knowledge does carry the day, where the mental model of what to do is a nice, clean fit with what the problem is at hand. You've seen it before, you know what to do. Eventually, and sometimes it doesn't take very long, experts fall into carryover mode. They begin to carry over old solutions and apply them to even new, dynamic, those new unexpected situations. So one study or numerous studies in different domains show that years of experience are only weakly or not correlated at all with skill and accuracy. Again, we've seen that in any profession. The person who's been there, done it, and they just begin to fade and they can't cope with the new. So just in, again, in new research, experts on expertise, so to speak, researchers, scientists have begun to uncover a new higher echelon of expertise called adaptive. These are the experts who, A, spend more time on average diagnosing a new complex problem than even novices do. Just think about that for a minute. They're quick and they're sure in the predictable routine, but they take the time to what I call inhabit the question. The second marker of adaptive expertise is that they widen the frame of their understanding. So in business, strategic business decisions are made a majority of the time based on one option and running with it. But what the expert in a new situation wants to do is think of multiple options. And then third characteristic is they test and evaluate that. Could be through thought experiments, could be through a focus group, etc. I call it take two. You want to stop the carryover mode and begin to think on the edge. These are the people who know when and how to be unsure. And so uh, here are some kind of, wait a minute, markers of routine versus adaptive expertise. Routine experts, the normal, quick, fluent expert, do not explore new problems. They hustle past them and jump to conclusions. They fall into that trap of carryover mode and defend their quickness and sureness as their badge of honor. The adaptive expert inhabits the question, widens and deepens their frame of understanding. In essence, it all boils down to listening to the stories that the problem, not their assumptions, wants to tell. And also, this remarkably is an approach not just to a crisis situation or a new problem, but to your career. Adaptive experts are shown to continually take on harder challenges. They operate at the edge of their knowledge. They welcome errors. Hat tip to whoever who said that. So adaptive expert is now being taught, expertise is being taught in design and medicine and engineering and education. It's kind of an antidote, I like to think, to Marshall McLuhan's idea of all at onceness. We sort of think in this age when time and space have collapsed that we can collapse the space between question and answer, and that doesn't work when we need to do a little more and to harness our uncertainty. So where's a practical tip related to adaptive expertise? Ask why questions. Ask what if questions, inhabit the problem. These kind of questions break the routine thinking that we are so, so easily allured into, running with. And one particular very well proven strategy is called consider the opposite. That is, if you're faced with a new problem and you are investigating a diagnostic option about that problem, well, then you might also want to put on the opposite lens of thinking. Now, what do I mean by that? For instance, if you are interviewing for a client-facing role on your team, and that person has to deal with people all the time, and so you're asking job candidates questions to draw out their extroversion, well, consider the opposite. Ask questions to find out if they're introverts. Now, you don't want an introvert. It's not a binary decision, but you might just elicit information that shows you someone who can deal with people deftly, but also reflect or have those quiet moments. You're getting the fuller picture if you consider the opposite. And in listening to your previous podcast I think in January, about the future of the field. I love the example by Natalie Hill, Chief Audience Officer at KCRW, who in terms of trying to help the station deal with this difficult future, they were trying to see the talent beyond the journalist. That meant giving play to a social content creator who's also a satirist. It meant also, she suggested that, making employees other than journalists storytellers. So I love that because that's really flipping the question and finding some really innovative answers. So just to get you back to the surgeon story, and let you know that the surgeon did not kill the patient, to my and their relief. It was a very dire moment, but afterwards, the two, Caroline Moulton and the senior surgeon, who will not be named, decamped to the cafeteria and had a kind of, pun intended, I guess, post-mortem on the situation. He said he was ashamed at this near miss, but he again defended his speed and his sureness as a badge of honor. Whereas Caroline Moulton is really, and her work is actually making ripple effects. It's being influential outside of the surgical world. I mean, she's actually holding up a new model of expertise, the adaptive expert, someone who has great skill and yet humility. And I love this quote by her: "When you're uncertain, that's when you care." So I've talked about uncertainty as good stress, the stance that you take to contend with the unknown. And I've talked a little bit about how uncertainty is an ally and accompaniment every step of the way in decision making. We can learn to wield it skillfully. It is part of the mix, not something to deny and avoid. And I'll just close by talking a little bit about the social side of uncertainty, because that's really important. It's not just a solo act. Basically, we can utilize uncertainty as a bridge to others who we oppose or categorize or stereotype. That's important. Uncertainty, there are strategies that can help us jostle our assumptions and our natural tendency to categories in order to engage with others. Very important. But I think I also researched, and I think it's very important not to lose sight of our side. In other words, we can use uncertainty in a world of polarization strategically to help us understand them, but also to combat the complacency of we, the closed-mindedness of our team, our unit, our type of people, etc., whatever you want to call it. So I did a deep dive in the research to a NASA team, the Mars Exploration Rover mission, that is considered one of the most innovative in space history. They're the team that over years, more than a decade, almost two, I think, have been putting these rovers, these robots, on Mars. An incredible feat. They're also one of the most studied of teams in the world. Really, I mean, every kind of social scientist has embedded themselves there. So one day, one little saga from the books, the history books, so to speak, one time, I think it was 2009, someone on this Mars team uploaded faulty software commands to the rover, one of the rovers on Mars, jeopardizing a device worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And so the leaders acted fast. They called an all-hands meeting after actually a weekend in which they put the rovers to sleep, sent everyone home to reflect, and called an all-hands meeting. Everyone had to come, virtually or otherwise. And, one would think at that moment, in that, very threatening situation, what did they say? I mean, did they say, let's get back on the same page? We've got a mission to do. In fact, they said the opposite. And it shows us a lot about the usefulness of uncertainty, the power of uncertainty in collaborative social situations. So we all need agreement, of course. I mean, that is the goal when you're on a project or hammering out a new, product or etc. But agreement can be an opiate to a team very rapidly, no matter how diverse the team is. The teams that are in agreement begin to see themselves as more similar than they really are. They become less willing to challenge one another. They become less creative, less accurate, and they lose sight of their performance declines. Teams in agreement rapidly rate themselves as doing jolly well because they love this ease and fluency of agreement. This is true whether you're on the Supreme Court, in sororities, on campuses, in workplaces, on corporate boards, and even on the slopes of Mount Everest. This is a wonderful picture taken by Evan Green, who was, on the first, summit, the first expedition recently to summit Mount Everest, and the expedition members were all people of color. It was an incredible, and he gave me permission to kindly use this photograph. Studies have shown that Mount Everest climbing teams that are diverse in knowledge and experience, they put together people who are veterans and people who are newbies in climbing in the Himalayas, etc., actually are more likely to suffer the death of a climber if they emphasize an all-for-one mentality. They literally become blind to the diversity among them. The full circle expedition I asked was not one of those. They constantly listened to all voices. They constantly, were, quite open to exactly the strategies that I'm going to talk about. Because what's the antidote to this toxic agreement that creeps in so quickly? It is disagreement, of course. Sounds logical. When people air their differences respectfully, when they disagree, when they allow dissenting voices, creativity flourishes, accuracy is raised, discussions intensify, and the quote unquote hidden profile of individual information that is overlooked so often in groups is unearthed, which helps the team move forward. Now, why is this? We might imagine in a world of polarization and divisions disagreements work because the right answer, the right side wins. Or we might say, the dissenter offers the right answer and everybody follows follows them, and then agreement happily occurs. It's wrong. Study after study shows that even dissenting or disagreeing opinions that are flat out wrong, that are an error, boost performance, because disagreement actually should create productive uncertainty. Disagreement actually instigates a kind of new skeptical questioning mindset. It's a little bit of a surprise, which is exactly how humans work. So that was a very, very important part of this MER team. As one Princeton sociologist said to me, uncertainty and disagreement, that's how this team succeeded for so long. That's why we're still talking about them. And in fact, studies show that 20% of conversations on the MER team involved micro conflicts, and all of these productive disagreements involved expressions of uncertainty. Like, I don't know, but maybe I read the transcript, and it's subtle. These are not yelling matches by any way, shape, or form. One granular kind of takeaway that we can all, I think, borrow from the Mars team is something called the listening ritual. So after that uploading of the faulty commands, in every meeting going forward, whether a small or a big meeting, the manager in charge of the meeting was responsible for ending the call or the in-person meeting by asking two questions. Is there anybody who doesn't understand? And is there anything we disagree with? And important point, of course, is that the Mars Exploration Rover meeting people, celebrated people who spoke up. They didn't treat them as pains or jerks. So they literally said at that all hands meeting, the leaders of the mission said, we need to get back to the quote rigor of questioning. that we once had. They didn't want everybody to remain on the same page. And today, I mean, even before the current assaults on DEI, companies have been, studied, and there's a great push to smooth over the friction of diversity. A third of employees say they avoid conflict at all together, and most, high levels are not trained for it whatsoever. So another takeaway other than the listening ritual we can utilize in our own lives is to not be afraid of hedge words. Hedge words are words like maybe, words like sometimes, could be, the kind of words that I saw in those Mars transcripts all over the place. The word like maybe, which seems wishy-washy and we equate with weakness, is actually in many studies, and particularly out of Harvard of executives, actually linked to people thinking that person is approachable. It signals that you're open to others' points of view. And linguistically, a word like maybe or a hedge word signals that there's something more to know. And that's couldn't be more important as a launch pad for learning. So maybe power is really important for a group. I'll just quickly uh, conclude. As I mentioned, volatility, arising, unpredictability, etc. The question is, how will we respond? And the science is in. We should not be equating uncertainty with weakness. It's critical for adaptability, resilience. I'm actually hopeful because I was saying before the call that so many people are interested in uncertainty, partly because the levels are so high, but to be so interested in something that we know is uncomfortable is really heartening and the way forward. In the business world, there's a tremendous recognition of the power of ambivalence for leaders. In medicine, some young doctors are being taught to bolster their tolerance of uncertainty to gain better diagnostics and also to avert burnout and anxiety. In AI, one of the hottest topics is unsure AI, uncertainty, objective, uncertain AI, technically speaking, in which robots and models are being designed to be unsure of their aims so that they become more flexible in their goals and the human can become a teacher and also safely work with um, you know, currently, tunnel vision, literal minded, dangerous AI. Finally, in psychology, there's a personality trait called uh, intolerance of uncertainty. I think I mentioned at the beginning, that's kind of a personality trait like extroversion or shyness. We all land somewhere, but in a nutshell, if you're intolerant of uncertainty, you're more likely to use denial and avoidance in crises like COVID, and you're also see uncertainty as a threat. It's highly linked to mental disorders, challenges like anxiety. People who are more tolerant of uncertainty are more flexible thinkers who see uncertainty as a challenge, not a picnic, but a challenge. And many psychologists, I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, which is on my website, and many different interventions are now treating anxiety just by helping people bolster their tolerance of uncertainty. During COVID, I moved up to the shore out of the city. The pool's closed. I'm a swimmer, and I took to the ocean. It took me a couple years, even as I was writing this book, to realize that while I knew it was very strengthening physically and there was a sociable element, but I finally realized why this was such a powerful experience. It was my daily dose of uncertainty, because that's how we up tolerance of uncertainty by continually biting off little pieces of the unknown, delegate more at work, try new restaurants, go to a country you don't speak the language. The ocean is a hotbed of unknowns, even if you've got the app, even if you've been there before, even if you know the beach. So I'm testing and practicing. And the lesson here is that there are opportunities all around us to gain skill in uncertainty. So there's a little recap. I'm very, very happy to, open up to questions. And just if you remember anything about this talk, just remember uncertainty is wisdom in motion. Thank you. And I'll stop sharing, or maybe you'll keep it on for a minute. What do you think? You're mute.
Yeah,
You're,
Chad, you're muted.
That explains why no one was responding to me. Okay, great.
I can,
Nope,
I,
always good. So we do have some questions, and let me dig into those. Andrea Quijada, I believe it's Andres at New Mexico PBS, asks, Maggie, can you say more about how to divert fear when it arises from uncertainty, especially for people who have a trauma response to uncertainty and have that sort of have uncertainty linked to fear?
Sure. Yes. Yes. And it's a big topic these days. But I think, we can recognize that stress symptoms are not necessarily fear, that it is the body's way of putting us on our toes. That's a really important reset for the mind. Then and we are, as humans, exquisitely sensitive to uncertainty. If I show you 3 words, very happy war, by the time your mind gets to war, it's instigated a brainwave related to the anomaly in the language and the surprise therein. We also can discern between expected and unexpected uncertainty. What does that mean? Expected uncertainty is, I know there's always a traffic jam on a certain corner when I'm trying to get into the city. That's expected. Unexpected is a whole nother measure. So acetylcholine is released instead of norepinephrine. I think I'm getting that right. But anyhow, we are exquisitely attuned. Pick up on those symptoms, tune into yourself. That's why it's so bolstering and strengthening to try little incremental, try a new ice cream flavor when you've, eaten mocha chip your whole life, or let your kid pack their suitcase for their vacation when you really want to get your hands on that little suitcase. These little things I love the fact that psychologists are doing tremendous work in the uncertainty field with these very doable steps. I think that's really important. And I'll say one thing. I wrote about a 12-week intervention to treat intractable anxiety in 12 weeks of just learning to bolster their tolerance of uncertainty. People's worries levels, at that very highly diagnosed level, their worry levels fell to about the same as the general population. Wow. I mean, and their depression and their anxiety levels. So really powerful stuff.
Cool. Deborah Muller builds on Andrea's question and says, could you also talk about how to deal with the sort of mental exhaustion, I think is what she's referring to, the exhaustion that comes as a result of being in that uncertain headspace? Is there any writing on that?
Well, I would say, and I think I don't minimize, or I truly acknowledge that the degree of uncertainty in our lives makes a huge difference. And the stress is exhausting. But at the same time, again, roboticists, these clinical psychologists, the doctors, the CEOs, the people who are studying it or begin to pick up on the strengthening of uncertainty use the same word again and again to me. It's liberating. If we can face the world with fear, without fear, but rather with wonder and curiosity, then there is a whole lot that is lifted off your shoulders. I mean, I personally find that this research has changed my life. This is my 3rd book. It's changed my life more than any others. It's allowed me to find the curiosity even in the most difficult situations. And again, I'm not minimizing what people are going through. It's that we are culturally attuned to centricity. We constantly think uncertainty is synonymous with anxiety, when by definition, anxiety is fear of the unknown, and uncertainty is the space of possibilities. And we don't always want it. People have written to me who are caregivers or people with cancer. And, we don't want anyone to be in that situation. But if we can be in even that kind of situation and explore rather than hide or fear or doubt or deny, then we're a lot better off given the circumstances we have.
I'm oddly reminded of like cinema studies and the theory that in horror films, once you show the monster, it's not so scary anymore. Like it's almost the uncertainty of the monster that like amps up the anxiety. And once you kind of know what it is, there's that point in the film where it sort of it becomes a different type of film. It's less psychological and more action. So
Yeah,
um,
and
I
also the work on bolstering your tolerance of uncertainty is related. It's a riff off of exposure therapy. So instead of being exposed to a dog, you're exposing yourself to the unknown. And one of the assignments that Ohio State researchers have given young people is to answer their phone without caller ID. That is exposing themselves to uncertainty, and young people have told me that they find that terrifying. We need practice.
Yes, I can see that. I remember doing that as a young person, and I don't know that I'd want to do that today. So, um, Isaac asks a question that you kind of touched a little bit on because you talked about writing your third book on uncertain. He asks, "What role did uncertainty play in writing your book?"
Oh, that's such a that's such a great question. Yes, I mean, I it started with Distracted, my second book, where I became interested. Attention is a vehicle. If you have focus, you're applying it to something. That's how I got to this third book because I wondered what kind of thinking do we need in the digital age when everything is so quick and brief. And I found that there were stages of research that involved frustration before and even after you gain focus. And that made me think, oh, I'm not stupid because I'm frustrated with these long, deep questions and these big research pieces. And I find the same thing with uncertainty is that doesn't remove the idea that I have to be in the weeds to even just to understand the liver, to be in that operating room. I have to be in the weeds. I have to synthesize and analyze and pull things together. Takes years and years for me to even, determine the idea for a book. And yet I now know it's a natural part of the equation. And again, that kind of silences some of those critical voices in your head because the messaging in our society is if you don't get it quick, you are stupid. And we think we have to enter the meeting with the answer, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What kind of messages are we giving our children? No time to think, no time to daydream, no time to drift. Just actually one little takeaway, there's a whole chapter on memory and pausing because uncertainty is a kind of suspense. You are not acting immediately. You are actually holding off action in order to find the better answer. But one little thing is take 5 minutes between kind of units in your day, interviews, meetings, etc. Pause and do absolutely nothing. And your memory for what came before will be bolstered by 20% because you're allowing your mind to catch up with experience, and curation of memory and knowledge is slow. And that's hanging out in uncertainty. That's uncertainty in action.
Giving your mind a chance to buffer, almost. Yeah. Or eat up the buffer, pull it out of the buffer. Maybe that's what it is. Cool. Anne Rotalante, I hope I'm saying that right. Asked a question when you were kind of discussing the disagreement section, and she says, "So disagreement for the sake of disagreement is good, i.e., devil's advocate positions." Question mark. Or is it only good when you're in a situation where you're in collective uncertainty, and not necessarily when you're in a situation of certainty and just need to complete a task? That makes
Well,
sense.
yes, there is some evidence that, we want uncertainty at the beginning of a task when things are open. You don't want to shut down on an answer, either individually or collectively, too soon. So this disagreement could play a greater role when you need the multiplicity of voices, different perspectives, things like that. The trouble is that we're prone to shut down on an answer because it feels good. And so uncertainty opens, just the disagreement sparks uncertainty, which keeps the problem open. And that's not something that we want to, there's nothing about what I'm saying that says we want to remain in limbo. We want those answers, as I say, we want resolution. But very often, sometimes it's very helpful to revisit a question, have disagreement, withstand it, even when you think the answer is clear, and just make sure that you're getting all perspectives and you're getting all of the kind of depth of understanding that you should before you move forward with the answer. I think devil's advocate, I did a pretty deep dive in that research, and it doesn't work when it's artificially nominated. It's considered too artificial. People transparently think that that person is a pain because they're just acting as the devil advocate in the military, in business, and all sorts of different situations. So what we're talking about is organically allowing people to, even subtle ways, take the time to disagree, again, respectfully. And the other thing that's really cool about that is our brain, this neuroscientist walked me through this wonderful, images of the brain. Our brain on disagreement is more energized. It's calling on different regions. And that's true in collaborative. People who are more on teams that have disagreement can withstand the uncertainty, and they also report they're more energized both in the moment and also over time. They learn more, they're more energetic. It leads to better job satisfaction, which is exactly what we don't think of, but it's true.
Great. We are almost to time. One last question. It's a simple one. Brandy Miller asks, going back to the part of the presentation where I think you were talking about aleatory uncertainty. She asks, budget things would be the first kind, I think aleatory, right? Because it's a future item that we don't know the outcome of. Is that aleatory uncertainty?
The
Mm.
budget.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yes. External. It's basically external versus internal. So it's a little bit of a blurred boundary, but anything out there that's new, ambiguous, unexpected, dynamic, unpredictable, that's aleatory uncertainty. And we call it kind of colloquially, we call it the uncertainty out there. There is uncertainty, or uncertainty rules the stock markets, or something like that. And of course, it's highly related to our uncertainty. But that's the part we can control, our response to what we can't predict or know.
Got it. Excellent. Maggie, thank you so much for giving us this hour. We're going to wrap it up here.
Yeah,
Much
and
appreciated. Yeah,
I'll put my contact in but you just can go to my email, my website, maggie-jackson.com, and there's my email. And I'm sorry we didn't get probably to all the questions and wonderful comments. Thank you for all your time today, and it's really terrific having the chance to talk with you.
excellent. Just a reminder to everybody, our August webinar will be with folks from the Stanford D School. Look for registration links for that in your email soon. That'll be August 21st, I believe, at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. And until then, everyone continue to have a good summer. We'll see you.